Perfect. Welcome, everybody. Great to see you all here today. Welcome to our Sunday. And what best way to start our Sunday than talking about some cakes, some really good Brazilian sweets and desserts. So we are hosting a fundraising where we'll be selling some delicious cake. There's a few different flavors that you can choose from, and also a flan as well. As you can see here, pre-order. It's pre-order only, and until October 20th, you can reach out to us via Facebook, WhatsApp, any sort of way, Instagram as well. Just reach out to us if you want to order a cake. The delivery will be on October 24th, so Sunday, next Sunday, a week from today, from 1 to 4 here at FSS. So it'll be a curbside pickup, and then you can come and grab your cake. So if you're wanting a sweet dessert next Sunday, reach out to us for a cake. There's condensed, there is a chocolate cake, there is white chocolate and strawberry cake, there is a dulce de leche cake, and also the condensed milk flan from Renato. So yes, it's a way to help us out, to keep our center here running while we wait for you all once we can reopen again. So that is our introduction for today, and we'll start our talk today with a text from the book The Living Spring by Chico Xavier, Through the Spirit Emmanuel. Here's the book in Portuguese. It's called Fonte Viva. And since our topic is around fear, we chose a text, number 132, that talks about being afraid. That is the title. And it refers to a passage from Matthew on chapter 25, when Jesus said, "I was afraid, so I hid your talent in the ground." It's a parable. And Emmanuel describes this as, in the parable of talents, the negligent servant attributes his unhappy failure to fear. He had received less potential to realize a profit. He had only one talent accounted to him, and he was afraid of struggling to make it grow. Similar to what happened to the careless servant in the gospel narrative, there are many people who blame their meager resources for not being able to do what they want. So they remain idle and say they are afraid to do anything. Afraid of working, afraid of serving, afraid of making friends, afraid of being a disappointment, afraid of suffering, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of happiness, and afraid of suffering. They reach the end of their physical body as human sensitives without having made the least effort to enrich their lives. In life, they fear death. In death, they fear life. And under the pretext of being disfavored by fate, they gradually become champions of uselessness and idleness. So if you have received a harder task in the world, do not be afraid. Make it your way of progress and renewal, no matter how dark the road to which circumstances have led you. Enrich it with the light of your effort at doing the good, because being afraid was not an acceptable excuse in settling accounts between servant and master. So let us pray. Let us close our eyes, elevating our thoughts to our Master, our Jesus, who throughout his entire life taught us courage taught us how to act with our hearts, how to act with our love. Where fear had no place in his heart, because it was full with love, with compassion, with courage. And today we ask you, Jesus, that you help us, all of us, be inspired by your words as we talk about this feeling that is near and dear to so many of us. And then we ask you that you can help us see ourselves as capable beings, see ourselves as strong beings, seeing ourselves as sons and daughters of God, created simple and ignorant, but with the potential to become your apostle, your disciple, as courageous as you are. So thank you for being here with us today. And may we be able to find the light that you shine upon us daily. Today, tomorrow, and for all the time to come. So be it. Thank you, Sonia. So, today, we're talking about fear, and it is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I think we can see this quite a bit around our world, be it within our family, our friends, our community. And the title is my fear hindering actions and feeling shame. And we'll be talking about this for 3 weeks, because it's a 3-part talk. And just in terms of vocabulary, hindering in Portuguese means dificultando. That's the translation. Or it's something that is impedindo, or preventing us. So is fear preventing us from actions? Is fear paralyzing us? Is fear not allowing us to act? And then, when we realize we didn't do what we wanted, do we feel the shame? Do we feel the guilt? And so on. And this whole talk is based on a talk by Alírio Sequeira Filho and a seminar that he did at the Spiritist Federation of Mato Grosso in Brazil, titled Healing of Fear, Phobias and Panic, or in Portuguese, Cura do Medo, de Fobias e de Pânico. And he did it throughout an entire weekend. It's available on YouTube, on the channel of FEANG, of the Federation. And we invite you all to go, because he's got 10 hours worth of content, and we're trying to do the same in 3 hours. So there's certainly a lot more there to be learned and to be listened. And as far as books and bibliography, we'll be using the Gospel, the New Testament, passages from Luke, passages from Matthew, Luke and Matthew, and John as well, and then everything that Alírio has brought to the seminar, especially when he brings to this all the knowledge he has around human psychology. So to begin, let us reflect amongst ourselves, and I know we can't do it so interactively, so we invite you all to put comments on YouTube, on Facebook, and then hopefully when we can be all here again, we can be a little bit more interactive, but we can make do with what we have today. So the first question is, can I think of a time? If we start thinking about the past, and it could be as early as yesterday, or as far as many years ago, can I think of a time when I wanted to do something? I wanted to act. I wanted to take action. And I didn't do it because I was afraid. Because I feared something. And then, a few days later, or a few years later, when I reflect back and I realize, damn it, I didn't do that. And because of that, I'm feeling ashamed today. I'm feeling hurt. I am not liking myself because of my inaction in the past. Just trying to get your guys' mind to go to a time when that happened. Think about an example. And I believe we can all relate to that at some point in time. And then, if we're reflecting about fear, what is fear? What do you think is that caused that fear that we had? What caused us to be afraid? What do you think that was? And what did I choose to do when I felt afraid? How did I deal with my fear? And how, especially, did I deal with my shame? When I felt afraid and didn't act, was I trying to ignore my fear, trying not to think about it anymore, pretend it never happened, trying to forget about that moment? Or did we try to actually reflect and understand why we were feeling afraid? So how do we deal with our fears? Right, and that's what the next question is. Right? Did I reflect upon it? Did I try to understand what was going on at that time that prevented me, that hindered me from doing what I wanted to do? And so we'll be reflecting together, hopefully, if nobody falls asleep, about it today. And because this is the part one of our talk, we'll be laying the groundwork. We'll be talking more about some specific terms, understanding what fear is, and giving some examples so we can relate to it. And at the very end, we'll be talking a little bit about healing. So looking at it from a healing perspective. And we'll utilize passages from Jesus to help us through that. And so, since we're laying the groundwork, since we're looking at some definitions, so we can speak the same language, so we can understand fear the same way, so I'm not miscommunicating, we'd like to bring the idea that there is a natural fear. There is us being afraid of anything that might threaten our existence. And that is an instinct. Right? When we're about to cross the street, we want to look both ways to make sure we're not going to get into an accident. Why do we do that? Because we're afraid of hurting our bodies. And that is an instinct. That is a healthy fear that makes life progress, that makes life stay, that it gives us a continuity to our life on earth. If we didn't have that fear, we wouldn't last very long. So again, this is an instinct, and it is something healthy. Now, when we take that fear a little bit to an extreme, and it becomes no longer something that threatens our physical body, but that it threatens our ego, or it threatens how people perceive us, or it threatens how people see us, or it threatens our pride, and so on and so forth. That becomes more of a pathological fear. And a pathological fear is that one where we don't feel that we're capable of doing something. And because we don't feel that we're capable, we choose and not to do it. And that goes back to what we were talking about just before. Whenever I want to do something but I don't because of fear. The minute I think about doing something, it's like, oh, I really should do this. This can help me. As soon as I finish that sentence, I start listing all the reasons that I shouldn't. I start to coming up with a lot of excuses, thinking, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if that happens? What if that happens? And I list so many excuses that by the time I'm done, I don't want to do that anymore. I've already forgotten the reason why I wanted to do it in the first place, and that leads us to that idleness that Emmanuel was talking about. Leads us to an inaction, to not do anything. And that's why in that little cartoon, the little person is all wrapped around fear. Because we're truly being wrapped around fear, or we can't move, or we don't take action because of it. So this would be the pathological fear, and we'll give an example that I'm sure lots of us can relate to it later. And again, just so we understand, bringing a few more terms here, we have on the other end of the spectrum, which is the lack of fear. Not just the lack of the pathological fear, which would be healthy, but the lack of that natural fear as well, which we call recklessness. In Portuguese, we call it temeridade. And the recklessness is when we're not afraid of anything. Right? We're always trying to push the limit. We're always trying to risk our physical life. Always trying to test it. How far can we go? And to a lot of us, this recklessness is seen as something courageous. It's like, wow, look at how much courage he has that he's jumping off that ledge. He's jumping off a plane, right? But that is actually not courage. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. That is a small disregard to our lives because we're risking it regardless of the consequences. So that is recklessness. So just so we understand, lay the groundwork of what these different things are, and so we can again talk the same language, right? So being driven by that natural fear is where we want to be. It is the balance where we're not reckless, but we're also not pathologically fearing things, where we're in idle. So going from the pathological to the natural, and we'll talk a lot more about this in the next weeks, in the weeks to come. So going from our pathological fear to our natural fear would be to develop our courage, understanding that yes, we're capable of doing things, like Emmanuel so beautifully brought in his text when he was talking about that even though we might face hardships, understanding that those hardships are there for a reason, and understanding that we can truly overcome them, that we have all the power, we have everything, we have all the tools that we need to overcome it. So that courage can help us bridge the gap and go and transform that pathological fear into action. On the other hand, going from the recklessness to the natural would be to understand or to bring back the reason for being here on earth, understanding the purpose of life, understanding why we're here, understanding why tragedies happen around the world, so we can reinstate our faith in our lives, reinstate faith in humanity, and that can certainly transform our recklessness. And we'll talk again a little bit about it later on. So let's do a quick exercise, and we'll be talking about, we'll be questioning an example that I'm sure a lot of us can relate to, and that is public speaking. So let's ask ourselves, what kind of fear is public speaking? If I'm afraid of speak publicly, what kind of fear is that? Is it a natural fear? Is it an instinct for survival? Or is it a pathological fear? And the example that a leader brought to us is, so let's pretend we're speaking in public in front of 200, 300,000 of people. At the end, when I finish speaking and I leave the room, are those 100, 200,000 people, are they coming to me to hurt me physically? Are they coming to harm my body, to harm my existence? In most cases, no. So that shows that the act of public speaking is not threatening our physical existence here, in most cases. Which tells us that public speaking is not a natural fear, because it's not threatening our life. Public speaking is a pathological fear, because what we're truly afraid of is what our ego is there. Afraid of being exposed, afraid of being laughed at, afraid of not doing a good job, afraid of the judgment of others. So all those, none of those are physical. None of those can hurt our bodies. None of those would be an instinct that would drive us to try to hold true. And so if we're afraid of public speaking because of these items that we talked about, because of our ego, that classifies it as a pathological fear, meaning we can reflect about it, we can understand more about it, and we can work to transform it. And that's the beauty of understanding. That's the beauty of learning more about it. Because the more we learn about it, the more we realize that if we truly want to, we have the tools to transform it. If we want to. And there are cases as well, and we're not going to develop this too much here today, but since we are talking about fears and phobias, there is a possibility where fear of public speaking could be a phobia. Just so we can illustrate the difference here, okay? And phobia is usually characterized by something that we have little to no control over, that we start panting, that we start sweating, that we're really afraid that we have to run away. And that would be usually driven by something that happened in our past life. So, for example, if I was giving a talk in a previous life, and there I was suffocated, I was killed, I was harassed a lot, and that traumatized me, and it physically hurt me back then it can come back as a phobia, and that would make sense. So it's not a pathological fear, more of a phobia, because again, it had that connection with a trauma, a physical trauma from before. But we're not going to develop a lot of phobias in this talk. That's for later. So we'll be focusing on the big picture here. Public speaking being a pathological fear, something that if we truly want to overcome, we can certainly work towards it. Right? We're not saying that we'll overcome all the public speaking fear in one lifetime, but it's certainly something that can be worked on. And then another example that we wanted to bring is the example of the recklessness that we see nowadays, which is what Leo calls an addiction to adrenaline, and I can speak that in terms because I actually like roller coasters and I like jumping off planes, so I can truly understand that addiction to adrenaline. And it's something that's very biologically easily explained. When we put our life at risk, our bodies, they're conditioned to release a lot of adrenaline in our bodies, so we can get into that fight and flight mode where we're being chased by a dog, for example, or by something that we're afraid of. We get that rush of adrenaline and we can run really quick. All right, so whenever our bodies are exposed to something that can harm us, we get the adrenaline rush so we can escape from it. In these cases where the risk is calculated, we're exposing ourselves to that danger, so we get that rush of adrenaline, which makes us feel like we can do everything. And what's interesting is right after the adrenaline rush, we get a rush of endorphins, which makes us feel calm, it makes us feel good, and it can certainly lead to an addiction of this ongoing cycle of adrenaline. But why do we seek this? Right? The question is truly on the why. And again, it's what we just talked about before, is when we're losing the sense of a purpose in life. That we need to try to find something that will make us feel alive, because we know alive. It's like the only purpose of us being alive is to go through those experiences, to risk, and to go further, and to go higher, and to go scarier at every point in time. So we can feel something, because we've numbed our feelings from before, when we've lost our address. That's what Alidio talks about, when we've lost our purpose in life, we've lost our sense of being, and so on. So that would be what drives us to the recklessness, and it can be something very addicting, but it can be an indication for us to go back to the basis, go back to the basics, go back to understanding why we're here, what is the purpose of our own lives, of our existence, and in that we give us the importance that our life on earth deserves, that we're not risking our lives, but we utilize our lives as this amazing opportunity given to us by God to go through our tests, to go through our trials, to go through our expiations, to make ourselves better. Right? So we're no longer disregarding life, but we're giving it its true purpose, its true meaning, its true importance. And now we are going to develop more of the fear. Right? We're going to talk about the pathological fear, which is the whole purpose of our talk today. And Alidio, he uses a sentence when he calls the fear of fears. That we fear so much that we fear the act of being afraid. So what does that mean? Let's talk a little bit more about that. We can start reflecting a little deeper about fear when we're thinking about why. Right? Why do we fear? And this is something that a social worker, American social worker called Brené Brown, talks a lot as well. It's that fear because we are afraid that we cannot please, that we cannot achieve excellence, that we cannot do the things that we're expected to do. And when we're afraid of those, when we don't think we can do it, we think we'll suffer. So we're afraid of that suffering. We're afraid of that, and that paralyzes us. It makes us not want to do it. And you can see there where there's no courage, because we're choosing that idleness, we're choosing not to act because we're afraid. And again, we can see here that we've lost our true sense of being. We've lost our true purpose here. Because there's a passage in the New Testament, in the Apocalypse, when it talks about the fear of losing something that's transitory. So when we fear losing something or not achieving something that is transitory, for example, if we fear losing all our money, if we fear losing all our statuses, if we fear losing how people will look at us, how people perceive us, if we fear not being respected, and so on and so forth, those things, they're all transitory. So the moment we are occupying ourselves with fearing losing things that are transitory, we're losing our focus. We're losing the purpose of us being here, which is to build upon our own spirit. And these are not transitory. These will be with us forever. Hence, that should be the focus of our lives, the focus of ourselves. And so Adida describes this as basically the fear of frustration. When we go through an experience, or we're about to go through an experience, we fear we might be frustrated. And that's something that we don't want to happen. So when we don't want to be frustrated, we choose not to act. And the thing that hurts ourselves the most is the fact that when we don't act, we are preventing ourselves from that learning opportunity. When because of fear we choose idleness, when because of fear we don't have the courage to act, we are preventing ourselves from that test. We are denying God's mercy at that time. And that can be very hurtful for ourselves. Perhaps not at the moment, but certainly later. Because there's a test, there's an opportunity that's coming at us, and we're choosing not to go for it. We're choosing not to learn from it, and so on. So that's why it can hurt us quite a bit. And so when we don't like being afraid, we usually, we don't usually, but there is an option out there, which is to utilize things that might help us. Help us in quotation, that it might make that fear go away, that it might numb our conscience in that time, so that fear is gone and we can feel courageous at the time and act. And we're talking about drugs here. Illicit drugs, absolutely. They certainly, we're looking to numb our conscience, so we're not experiencing that fear, because experiencing fear is not something good. So we try to numb it so we can feel the courage to act and to go ahead. But we wanted to shift directions and talk about the illicit drugs, the prescribed drugs that the doctors can prescribe to us, and how much those can actually help. I want to start by talking about the subject, which can be fairly sensitive, by understanding that those drugs, those prescribed drugs, they're available because they can certainly help us. But it's really important for us to understand there's a difference between use and abuse, where the use can help us a lot and the abuse can lead us astray. So we'll focus now on what is the prescription medicine doing to us, and is that all we need to do, or should we do something else? And to talk a little bit about that, we want to focus on the cause. So what do we think is causing that fear? What's the deep the cause? Where is that fear coming from? If we think that fear is coming from our brain and our brain only, taking those those prescribed medications, they will help us, absolutely. And we're just going to keep taking them on forever. But when we understand that the cause of anything that happens in our bodies, especially anything related to mental health, like our pathological fear, there is something deeper. The cause of that is within our spirit. And prescription medication, they can absolutely help us go through this phase. A lot of times give us the breathing room that we need to reflect deeper. But the reflection, understanding where that's coming from and working on that cause needs to go hand in hand. So much so that if we are working on the cause, if we are looking for help, a therapist, a friend, or whoever it may be, but if we are truly working on that cause, looking at transforming ourselves, eventually we might be able to no longer need that medication and be able to stand on our own. A lot of times we don't even need to get to the medication stage, because if we are working on that cause, we might be able to transform that before we need the medication. So it's really important to understand that there is a place for the medication. It's really important, but it by itself will not fix the cause. The cause is a little deeper than our brains. The cause is in our spirit, and for us to reach our spirit, that the way to do that is through reflecting about the causes, understanding, again, everything that we talk about here, everything that Spiritism can bring us awareness of, understanding our purpose here, understanding where we come from, why we're here, where we're going, and truly reflecting about the drivers, the cause of that fear, and working day in, day out to transform it. That is what can truly help us free ourselves from it. And another reflection that Alita brings is the fact that when we move over to the spiritual life, we no longer have a physical brain. So what will be driven when we are disincarnated is our spirit. So those causes that we were trying to numb in our earthly life will likely no longer be able to be numbed in our spiritual life. So certainly realize the importance of transforming our spirit as opposed to just numbing it. So now we're going to bring a few examples and a few passages from Jesus that he helps us not only understand it, but also offer some motivation for us to look into this a little bit deeper. When he first tells us in John, he says that, "Do not let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, and you too believe in me." So he says, do not trouble your hearts. Do not let your hearts be troubled. So here, when he's talking about hearts, one of the interpretation that we can take is that he's talking about feelings. And he's saying, do not let your feelings be troubled. So anytime our feelings are troubled, he invites us to believe in God, to believe in Jesus, in himself, and to learn from them, so we can then work and untrouble our hearts, basically. And so our hearts are no longer troubled. But who is Jesus to tell us this? So Alita makes a quick reflection about why choosing to believe Jesus. What can he bring to us that might help our hearts not be troubled? Well, Spiritism brings us this amazing concept that Jesus is not God. Jesus was a spirit that was created just like us, simple and ignorant, And throughout his many lives, he was able to reach his state of a pure spirit. So he has gone through a lot of he has gone through his evolution, just like we are going through now. So he truly is the truth, the way, and the life, because he's gone through it. So we can certainly learn from him, because if he built all that courage that he had, if he built all that love that he had, we too are capable of doing that. And he gave us a manuscript, or he didn't write anything, but his life is present in the New Testament, in the Gospel, that we can utilize his life as an example. So we can utilize him as a model and as a guide to our lives, so our hearts are not troubled. And the other thing that I wanted to bring is the fact that our insecurities are something that fuel our fears quite often, and we are afraid of like we just talked about, losing things that we hold dear. And those don't necessarily need to be material things like money, but it can also be like we just talked about, the status, being afraid of being made fun of, or being afraid of people judging us, or losing our status, losing our respect, and so on and so forth. And those, they can certainly hinder us from doing things. It's like we're constantly looking for approval from somebody else, or from society as a whole. And that frustration that we're so actively trying to prevent, right? We're trying to prevent being frustrated. We're trying to prevent from being ridiculed. Jesus never promised us a life without frustrations. He never promised us a life without any frustration, without any bad moments, or without any hardship. If we're trying to live with a life without frustration, we are bound to have fear. So this can be very enlightening if you think about it this way. If you're trying to live a life without any frustrations, we're bound to fear, because we're fearing the frustration itself. And Jesus never told us that we wouldn't have frustrations. So much so that he invited to him those who were frustrated. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Right? So all the ones that are frustrated, those are the ones that he called for. So he didn't promise a life without frustration, but what he did tell us was that those frustrations could be light. Those frustrations could be subtler, if we chose to have this humbleness and the apprentice feeling in our hearts. When we start seeing the things that we go through not as frustrations, but as opportunity to learn. There's no waste of time if we're truly reflecting about an experience, whether we did it right or we did it wrong. Both can give us, both can be worth reflecting upon, so we can learn from them. So there is no wasted time. And in this sense about fearing frustration, fearing rejection, it's really interesting when we think about Jesus, when he himself was rejected by many, and he still is rejected by many to this day. And he was the most pure, the purest spirit to walk on earth. And the purest spirit to walk on earth was still rejected by many. So if we're trying not to be rejected by others, if we're trying to not do something because we're afraid of rejection. Who are we to think that we can please everybody if not only Jesus could do that? So who are we to think that we can please everybody if Jesus himself couldn't do it? So this can give us a little bit of warmth, a little bit of help when we're looking at this pathological need that we have to prevent us from feeling frustrated. And the other passage that Christ gives us is in Matthew chapter 6 that can help us with fear, when he tells us that, therefore, do not worry about the tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So here is the reflection about our efforts. And when are we doing our efforts? We can safely say that we have small moments of fear, right, throughout our days, throughout our weeks. What are we choosing to do with those fears that we encounter daily? Are we choosing to ignore it? Are we choosing to numb it so we don't feel it? Or are we choosing to reflect upon them every day? Understanding, why was I feeling that way? And maybe what can I change next time so I don't fear as much? So what are we doing? So if we're trying to ignore that fear, if we're trying to numb it, if we're not looking at it, that fear builds on. And that fear will build in small little pieces, in small little chunks, until, as we see quite a few times nowadays happening with so many of us, is you might, for example, be at a shopping mall, walking like nothing is happening, and then all of a sudden you start to shake, you start not to know where to go, you don't know if you should be walking forward, backwards, if you're on a turn, if you want to go into the store, if you're not, and you start sweating, and you start shaking, and you don't know what's happening. I'm describing a panic attack. So we might think that came out of sudden, that came out of nowhere. But when we start reflecting about it, we realize that throughout many years, we've been ignoring our fears. We've been ignoring our daily fears, and we're putting it to the side up to a point where it blows up, it pops up, and it comes to remind ourselves. It comes to invite us again to look into the fear and understand what's driving it. So it's never out of a sudden. There's usually something that's been building upon over and over and over again. So a lot of we usually, not usually, but we might find after ignoring our fears so much, we might utilize that as an excuse for us to really not look at it. And once we know we're going to go through a situation where it will put us to a test, that will likely drive our anxiety, that it will likely drive our fears, when we know we'll be facing that, we might choose to numb our conscience. We might choose to take something because we don't think we'll be able to do it, to go through that situation without it. And we might tell ourselves, well, this is happening tomorrow. I don't have time to deal with it now, so I'll take something. And that's perfectly fine. But are we, after the fact, are we reflecting about it again? Are we trying to understand what was driving it? So perhaps next time I can maybe take just half, or not take not take something at all. Right? So we always do have time if we make time to reflect about it. And now we're going to take a few reflections with Jesus, and we're going to reflect about healing. What does it truly mean to heal? Right? It's not really. What does it truly mean to heal? What kind of healing are we looking for when we're talking about fear, for example? Do I just want to get rid of my fear in that moment so I can enjoy that experience? Or am I trying to find a solution for my fear? Right? And this is a really important reflection for us all to make, be it with fear or with anything else that we're trying to solve. Are we trying just to get rid of it, or are we truly trying to solve it? Stories in the gospel when that Jesus brought us in his passage, because a lot of most of the times he will tell someone that it was your faith that saved you, or before he would perform that healing, he would ask, do you have faith that I can do this? So he was trying to get the person to start reflecting about it. He was trying to bring the healing to be an actual solution, so the person would realize that the power for healing lies within the person. So he was inviting the person to think about that, to reflect about that. And to give an example about this, in Luke chapter 17, I believe, Luke chapter 17, there's a passage from Christ when he heals the 10 lepers. So 10 lepers come towards him asking to be healed, and Jesus actually, he doesn't heal them at that time. He says, go find a priest. And then when they're walking, when the lepers are walking towards that priest, is when they start to be healed, and the leper is gone. And Amelia Rodrigues, in a book through the medium de Valdo Franco, when she's explaining a few stories about Christ and giving more details, he says that out of those 10 that were healed, only one came back and thanked Jesus and felt gratitude and came back to Jesus. All the other 9 went on with their lives. And later that day, she tells us that Christ was seen crying, and then they walked they walked to Christ and asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "Well, because out of those 10 that I healed, only one came back to talk to me. The other 9 have lost themselves again already. They're already going through and making things that they'll regret later. They haven't utilized that healing for their benefit. Only one out of the 10 truly was healed, truly was saved." And this brings us that reflection when we always hear that when Christ said, "For many are called, but few are chosen." So we are given opportunities for us to heal ourselves daily. In that moment, 10 lepers were healed. 10 lepers were given the opportunity to be saved. But only one was truly saved, because he took that opportunity, he took that healing, and he incorporated it into his life. He understood, and he focused his shift about just enjoying the material things of life like the other 9 did. And he went back to Christ to learn more from him. And so when Christ says, for many are called, but few are chosen, that's one of the things he's talking about. The opportunity to be healed, the opportunity to transform our fear is out there for all of us. Now it's up to us to take upon those reflections, to take upon those opportunities and truly save ourselves and truly try to transform it day in and day out. So these were some of the reflections that we wanted to bring around fear. Hopefully I didn't bore anybody to death. And we'll be talking about part 2 and part 3, which will be a little bit more lively. We'll talk a little bit of more applicable things that we can utilize within our lives to help us out. But it is important to have some reflections, again, to level the playing field so we can understand the terms and we can utilize an important reflection about healing. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to get rid of our fear, or are we trying to solve it? So that's all I wanted to bring, and if there are any questions or comments.
No, just my comment.
Thank you. Yeah.
That I said that the invitation is for self-knowledge, to understand the causes of our fears. The invitation from your lecture is to look deep inside of us and see the causes of the fears that we are facing in our lives.
Absolutely.
And just also provide the name of the book that you were referring to about the 10 lepers.
Oh, yes.
It's found in Brazilian version only. The name is Spiritist do Reino.
Right. Yes.
Yes. It's photographhed by Gerald Frank.
Thank you, Sonia.
It's a wonderful book.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it's very similar to
Vanova. There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for bringing that name. I forgot to write it down. Thank you. And what you said about diving deep into learning about ourselves, understanding the causes of that fear, ties in so well with when Jesus told us in John chapter 8, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. That works here as well. The more we know about ourselves, the more we know about what truly is driving us to act, how we're acting, that in itself can already start to set us free. Right? So the importance of that self-knowledge. So thank you for being here and for making your comments.
Yeah.
And so we'd like to close in a prayer, and in closing our eyes and taking a deep breath. And again, just being aware of Jesus around us, being aware of His knowledge, of His love for us, being aware of His energy, of His calming and His welcoming love surrounding us. And we would like to thank Him for inspiring all of us and for providing us the opportunity to talk about these topics, for giving us His life as an example for us to find the answers that we seek, for us to find the truth, the way, and the life in His heart. Thank you, Jesus, for truly giving us this divine gift of your presence amongst us. And we ask that you help us, that you give us the strength that we need to utilize everything that you taught us to make us a little bit better today and tomorrow. So be it.